Asha Dore with Totally Biased Reviews, and I'm talking today with Nicole Graev Lipson about her book, Mothers and Other Fictional Characters.
First of all, I love that an essay collection is getting so much attention. It's just really nice when that happens. I feel like it's kind of rare. And everything that I hear from editors and agents these days is kind of like, oh, essay collections and memoirs are impossible to sell,
Yeah.
and this is great. So I'm encouraged, and I love the subject and I love the book. So I'm just really happy.
Oh. Someone told my agent when we were on submission, even poetry sells better than essays.
What? No, it doesn't.
I'm Nicole Graev Lipson. I'm the author of Mothers and Other Fictional Characters, which just came out from Chronicle Prism in early March. And I live in Brookline, Massachusetts with my husband and my 3 children. And my work has been published in places like The Sun and Virginia Quarterly Review, Gettysburg Review, River Teeth, and other literary journals. I'm going to begin by reading the back cover copy of my book because it's much easier for me to try to explain this book, which in many ways is hard to encapsulate, by reading what I've already come up with and trying to reinvent the wheel. What does it take to escape the plot lines mapped onto us? Searching for clues in the work of her literary foremothers, Lipson untangles what it means to be a girl, a woman, a lover, a partner, a daughter, and a mother in a world all too ready to reduce us to stock characters. Whether she's testing the fragile borders of fidelity, embracing the taboo power of female friendship, escaping her family for the solitude of the mountains, grappling with what to do with her frozen embryos, or letting go of the children she imagined for the ones she's raising, Lipson pushes beyond the easy, surface stories we tell about ourselves to brave less certain territory. Okay, so this is an excerpt from an essay in the book called The Friendship Plot, and it's an essay that explores the power of female friendship. And I'm, just to give a little context, I'm talking about my dear friend Sarah, who was a co-teacher with me in my first teaching experience as a high school English teacher. It's hard to know when fascination blooms into friendship. Was it the afternoon Sarah and I moved our planning sessions down the street to Café Con Leche, lingering for hours over plates of oily tostones? Or the day my jeans got muddy on a field trip and she magically handed me a fresh pair of sweatpants from her bag? Or was it the first time we got together with our fiancés, the 4 of us testing our chemistry over a pot of bubbling fondue? I became conscious, with Paul and Phil there, making small talk over their beef skewers, of how activated we became in each other's presence, like 2 plucked guitar strings, all vibration and reverb. It was, by any traditional measure, an exciting year for the 2 of us, both set to be married in a matter of months, both freshly astonished to be accelerating toward the happily ever after portion of our lives. But this thing between us 2 was a kind of romance, with its own breathless thrill, its own private language of affection. No one before had commented on the dignity of my posture as I sat at a computer, or marveled at how completely my handwriting captured my essence. I had not known, until she mentioned it, that I had an essence, let alone one worthy of being transmitted to paper. For her birthday that winter, I wrote her a sonnet. For no particular occasion that spring, I crocheted her a scarf. Never before had I been inspired to write someone a sonnet. Never before had I wanted to make anyone a scarf. We laughed constantly, our laughter merging between us like a song in stereo. We laughed especially at times when laughter was inappropriate, clamping our hands over our mouths during professional development meetings, slinking down in our seats during cum laude award assemblies. The things we found funny tended toward the absurd, like the time we used a stale fruitcake a parent had regifted me as a volleyball at the faculty holiday party, or the time she hid, and in the nick of time produced, my copy of Crime and Punishment right before class. Crime and Punishment was a serious and profound and daunting book to teach, but also an excellent prop for a practical joke. The summer after our first year of teaching, we attended a conference together at an international baccalaureate high school in New Mexico. After long morning sessions, we would step out of the air-conditioned library onto a sunny courtyard shared by the school's working farm, with its corral of friendly alpacas. They were a sight to see, these alpacas, blithely munching hay in the middle of campus. But on the other hand, it was lunchtime. While she stood beside me, murmuring, "Look at those eyes! Look at that fluff!" I silently imagined how long the cafeteria line was getting. It was, and still is, like this with her at times, the extremes of her wonder stretching me to the edges of my patience. But when I look back on that week now, what I remember above all are those creatures, the prick of their ears in the heat, the burst of their fur between my fingers. And I remember this. On the final evening of the conference, at a picnic table under a purpling sky, we revealed to each other the most shameful thing we'd ever done. The thing about us nearly no one knew. It doesn't matter what she shared with me or what I shared with her. What matters is what she told me after, as we walked the moonlit pathway back to the dorm. "It means so much to me," she said, "that I can tell you anything and trust that you won't be shocked." Was this true? Possibly it was. But it was also possible that it was she who had made me this way, spacious enough to admit life's darkest shadows. We become ourselves, in part, through the women we befriend. They imagine us a little better than we are, and what they picture comes true. I began writing the collection when my children were quite young. I have 3 children. I think they were around 8, 5, and 3 when I began writing this. And one of the things that compelled me to the page was this feeling that I had as a new mother and a less experienced mother, that I had sort of lost myself to this persona of mother with a capital M, that I felt, as so many women who become mothers do, the tyranny of this looming mythical ideal mother, the self-sacrificing mother, the constantly calm and collected mother. There are even certain trappings and costumery that go along with this, right? Like, I wanted to be one of those mothers who could wear her child in a sling and look like an earth mama. And I remember once trying to do this and my baby literally falling out. I caught her, but I was sweating trying to get the Moby wrap on, because I felt like it was just part of this performance that I wanted to achieve. And at the same time, there were all these really transformational things about motherhood, really rich parts of becoming a mother that did feel very real, but I'd lost myself a lot to the performance, and writing became a way of trying to brush away all of those expectations that came from our culture, but that I'd also internalized. And I began to write some of the earliest essays in this book as an attempt to find my way back to myself, to say, here's the experience I'm having, and what is the deepest truth that I can locate in this experience? How can I brush away all of the fictions that I've created around myself as a mother, and how can I get to the truth of it? Mothers, or the mother with a capital M, is one fictional character that I explore in the book. But it became a portal toward exploring all of the templates of womanhood that are impressed upon women as we move through life, starting in girlhood. There is sort of a stock character of a good girl, what a girl should be in our culture. And there's stock characters of maidenhood, and once you're past girlhood, being sort of the ingenue or the sex object. And then moving into the fertile years, you can step into the mother stock character, or in our culture, you can step into the childless cat lady template. And there isn't much else available to women other than these 2 categories. And then moving on to older age, middle age, older age. And, there's sort of the witchy persona or the crone or invisibility, because a lot of women in our culture as they are past the childbearing years and in the latter half of their life, there is no character for them. They just simply become invisible, irrelevant. I wanted to explore all of these. So that's where the other fictional characters in the title comes in.
One thing that I liked about your book, just from my personal history, I really loved that you even talked about The Awakening. Nobody ever talks about that book, which is insane. I learned that book in high school. So
it's so interesting that you bring up The Awakening, because I have to say, on my book tour so far, when I'm speaking with readers, so many of them bring up The Awakening and connect with that book and my story in Mothers and Other Fictional Characters of my own connection with that book. So it really resonates with a lot of women. And I think even though it was written quite some time ago, the same questions and frictions and tensions still exist inside women.
I think that there's the idea out there that there's a cliche around it, like the, walking into the water. It's interesting because when I read that book in high school, I was like, what is wrong with her? It did not take long for me to feel really differently and remember parts of that book as applied to my own life. And so I love that in your book, in your essays, so much of that happens where it's like just taking these stories and books and plays and reflecting and bouncing them around your own life and the life of people you know. It's such a cool, kind of realistic to me way of being in conversation with literature and stories.
Yeah, I was a high school English teacher for many years, and I contemplated sort of at the beginning of my career getting a PhD in English and teaching it at the college level and being more of an academic. And one of the reasons why I decided to be a high school English teacher was because that's what I love most about literature, is the way it becomes a filter through which we can examine our own lives or the lives of people around us. English class to me was always sort of like life class. That's why I loved it in high school. We ended up just talking about things that honestly felt important and relevant and juicy and meaty and stuff I wanted to talk about starting as a teenager. And I still do. I mean, put me in a room with other people who have read the same thing as me and let me talk to them about it. So that was a really natural way for me as a writer of digging into some of these true stories from my life, was to filter them through literature or to use literature as a prism to look at them in different lights.
I love that you brought up the invisible women thing. I think about this scene in 6 Feet Under all the time when, the two older women are in a department store and one of them convinces the other one to steal some lipstick and is just like, nobody pays attention to us. We're invisible. We can do whatever we want.
I don't remember that scene, but that's beautiful. I would have, that's the sort of thing I would have loved to snatch up and include in an essay. It's great.
Right.
There is a freedom to it. I think there is a freedom to aging.
Yeah. Kind of like you said, it's like nobody pays attention to you, but the templates are gone too. So this is the question that people always ask me about pitching my own work. Who is this book for? Who should read your book?
Well, I sort of think of the audience for my book as being almost like concentric circles. I think that it will appeal to a broad range of female readers, maybe mothers first and foremost, but I don't think only mothers. I was recently on a panel about sort of the motherhood ideal that included mothers and non-mothers, women who have chosen to live child-free lives. And one of the things we talked about that was so interesting is how the bias that mothers have to contend with in our culture is just the underside or the flip side of the bias that non-mothers have to contend with in our culture. Women who don't have children in our culture are thought of as not true women in some ways, in failing at the mother ideal, sort of failing at the womanhood ideal. Women who do have children, suddenly we become only mothers, right? That ideal swallows us, that identity swallows us. So I think the real problem is really how binary our culture is in thinking about these things. I bring that up just to say that I think non-mothers or child-free women would also relate to a lot of the content in the book. But I actually wrote an essay for Poets and Writers recently about what I sort of see as the sidelining of quote unquote mother books, and this sort of knee-jerk assumption that mother books are for mothers only, where the point I make in that essay is that I make a number of points, but one of my main points is that motherhood, it isn't a niche genre. It's treated often like a niche genre, like, almost as if it was a book about quilting or lady detectives or something like this, and very much marketed toward mothers. And I'm absolutely mothers. I want mothers to be my audience. I think they are a core audience, but motherhood doesn't exist in a vacuum. It intersects with every other rich, fascinating, compelling aspect of the human condition that writers have been drawn to and artists for time immemorial. We have a front row seat as mothers, as caregivers to the human condition, right? We're brought face to face with death. We're brought face to face with grief. We're brought face to face with desire, longing, everything, nature. It allows us such a rich and interesting perspective onto the human condition. And so I would like to think that this book is for men and non-binary people and all spectrums of genders that exist, and that lots of people can find comfort in it or learn something from it or see themselves reflected in it, even if they might not look exactly like my demographic.
I often find it so super weird that mother things are like put into a corner, because like I think probably all humans have a mother.
Yeah.
In some way. It's part of our experience. It's just like the one thing that is always going to intersect all of us. Like we can't, it's an
100%.
Unavoidable fact of living is that we came from the body of a mother of some kind.
I think Adrienne Rich has a quote in Of Woman Born about that exact thing, saying we all came from a mother. Beyond that, even if we aren't mothers ourselves, we might be partnered with a mother or married to a mother, or we might be the parent of a mother. There's just many ways where motherhood is germane to all of us. And interestingly, too, I wrote some of these essays in my MFA program at Emerson College in Boston. In that class, everyone had to read my book in progress because it was a syllabus requirement, right? So in that class were men. In those classes were students who were gender nonconforming. Looking back on who were some of my fellow students, some of my peers who connected with my work and responded to it, who were the biggest champions of my writing, the majority of them were men.
Childbirth is like the most metal experience, other than maybe like doing surgery or war. Or some kind of like, or murder. I've always wondered if that's why, and also maybe just like mommy issues or something, that's why men are so often in writing groups, so supportive and so like interested and professional often about how to address the craft of the piece and stuff like that. I don't know. That's like been my working theory for like 20 years.
Yeah. I don't think we can blame men per se for not reading these books. I think part of what that might be is just a lack of exposure. It's not marketed toward them. I hate to say it, but in our culture, while we've made all kinds of progress in terms of women wearing quote unquote, masculine clothing, or women stepping into quote unquote male professions, we haven't made the same progress the other way around. And there's anything that is marked as female in our culture, there's still a lot of stigma for men to adopt it or embrace it. And obviously, like, there are plenty of men who don't give a crap about any of that and embrace it all. But I think, is there stigma for a man to be reading Mothers and Other Fictional Characters like on the subway? I don't know, maybe, right? I think there's a whole slew of things we're contending with when we think about getting stories like this to audiences who truthfully might deeply appreciate them once they have a chance to read them. So I think it's a real shame. I think that the sidelining of mother books does a disservice to male readers, that it underestimates the imaginative capacities of men.
It does. I like that a lot. Do you have any like scenes right now where you're like, I just really like reading that one, or that's like my favorite little scene baby?
Oh, interesting. There are a number of moments that I feel proud of in the book. And it's interesting that there's many of these don't lend themselves oddly to reading. Like now that I'm selecting passages to read at bookstore events, sometimes it's hard to read certain scenes because there isn't enough context for the audience to appreciate it at the moment. But I still really dig the opening of my book. What I like about it, what makes me feel proud or happy that I was able to arrive at that particular scene, is it does what the opening of any book or any essay needs to do, which is pull the reader in and establish drama and conflict pretty swiftly. But it also introduces so many of the themes that end up being crucial to the book. I think it does work on so many levels, and I wish I could say that that was intentional. But I didn't even know I was writing a book when I wrote that essay. It was one of the earliest ones that I wrote, and I conceived of it as a standalone essay. I just love now, in retrospect, seeing the many ways that the kernel of the book existed in that scene. It's usually maybe 2/3 of the way through an essay that the deep revelations are happening. I've found myself in public readings having to resist the temptation to stop in the middle of a sentence and be like, well, if you were with me for this first essay, you would understand that the reason why. And I'm like, you know what, Nicole, it's just people will appreciate it on whatever level they can access.
That's right.
It's
so true. Do you have any essays that you cut out of the book that you kind of miss, or that you're cut out maybe for a good reason, but you still really like?
There was an essay in the book in an early version called Special Time. It was about my aversion to playing with my children. I really loved that essay, and I was sorry to see it go. But the reason that it had to go was because I ended up addressing many of the same central questions of that piece in other essays in deeper and more nuanced ways over time as I continue to write. Including it just didn't make sense in the end. But I still love that piece as a standalone piece for what it is. And you know what else I had to cut a lot of? As a writer, one of my biggest challenges is that I often go one beat too far. I have a good closing paragraph, and then I write another closing paragraph after. Almost any outside editor, or mentor who's read my work often says, I think you can end here. And they're usually right. So I feel like there are a lot of kill my darlings moments with the final sentence or final small paragraph of a piece. I should probably try to make poems out of all of the cut last lines of my essays. Because they were good. They just weren't necessary.
Do you want to talk about the publishing process of this book? I'm super interested, especially because, you did write an essay collection and seem to have an agent, and it also got published, which are things that we hear all the time are kind of impossible.
When my agent went out with this manuscript, my first job out of college, which I write about a little bit in the book, was as a editorial assistant at a publishing house in New York City. So I know to take rejection letters with a grain of salt, because very often rejection letters are written by assistants who read the first page or two and decide whether they are going to keep reading and hand it over to the editor that they work for. So I would just encourage all writers who are sending books out on submission not to take rejection letters as the gospel, or to think of them almost as editorial letters, because they're not. The rejection letters that we received seemed to have a shared theme for the most part, which made me begin to trust that there was something to this, which was something to the effect of, love the writing, but I'm just not sure how to break this out from all the other mother books. Or the one that stuck with me the most powerfully was, love the writing, yada, 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 but the mother shelf is just so full. And I tucked that phrase away in my mind, which is what writers do, right? I'm like, that is horrible, but it's also beautiful because it is the most perfect metaphor for the ways in which imaginative writing by mothers is sidelined, categorized, put in a little corner. So I held on to that phrase for a number of years, a few years. My book was acquired, but I held on to that. And then I wrote an essay called Dismantling the Mother Shelf. And that's the name of the essay that is in Poets and Writers this issue. It's in the March-April issue. So my submission process was full of disappointments like that, but I did ultimately find a wonderful editor who fell in love with the writing and believed that the book could reach a broader audience and strike a chord. I've heard in the past friends have said to me through the submission process, it only takes one editor. You don't need 10 editors. It only takes one editor. And that's what happened. It only took one editor. I think no matter how good a book is or a manuscript is, there is a degree of luck to all of it, which is really, really scary because we like to think we control our fate in some way. But I think the fate that we do control is just doing our best to write the best possible book that we can. And then we have to go through all the motions to set ourselves up for success, on the publishing side, but we can't guarantee that success. And that's what's so hard. There's all sorts of different ways that a book can find success. And one might be kind of in the marketing of the book. And I think another could be in the writing and this passing of the book, reader to reader, through word of mouth. And these are very different things. One relies much more on the soundbite or the elevator pitch or the sexy headline. Maybe there's something shocking in it that makes people stop and pick it up. But I also think there's still a real hunger for really wonderful writing that hits you in the gut. And that's harder to put on a headline. But if you can get people to start reading, that too, I think, is really powerful in terms of spreading the word.
One person that I interviewed has a little chapbook that's with a small press, but it's one of the most impactful books that I've ever read because she was writing about her child who she had adopted who had really profound mental illness. And one of my children has mental illness and has had it since he was very, very young. And it's something I've literally never seen in anything ever. We just hide this reality. And so I think that, I would love for her book to get out there and be everywhere in the world. But for me, just one person, it was really, really helpful. And it's a tiny little lyric thing,
Yeah.
So I feel like that's success too.
It is 100%. And for me, when I receive a note from a reader, that's really a person to person response to something I've written that's heartfelt and specific. That is gold. That is the pinnacle. That's why I wrote the book. I was feeling, as I said, in many ways that I had lost myself and wanted to use writing as a way to sort of grope my way back to truth. But another reason why I did this was almost like I wanted to send a letter out into the world asking people, do you feel this way too? Am I the only one who screams at her children sometimes? Am I the only one who sometimes finds herself attracted to men who are not my husband? All these things that we're conditioned to feel shame around as women. I wrote this book so that other readers might be able to take comfort in my words or see some aspect of their experience reflected in mine. But honestly, selfishly, I wrote it so that I could find those people for myself too. And I have. Putting this book out into the world has made me feel less alone. The writer-reader relationship, it's like a comradeship. Because I think as writers, a lot of what compels us to the page, or I'll speak for myself, is this feeling of otherness. This feeling that I've always sort of felt like I don't quite fit in, or like everyone else knows what it is that we're doing here on Earth, what this business of being human is all about. And I somehow missed the memo. I've often felt like that. And so that's what compels me to write. It's almost out of that confusion or alienation or aloneness.
So the form, we talked about it a little bit. And, you might have already answered this with talking about teaching English and just connecting with literature. But I didn't read about your book until I read it. frankly, I just don't even have time to read about people's work before I read it. So I just jump right in. So I didn't know what the form was. And I was super pleasantly surprised. Essays that are connected with traditional stories, but not in the way that we usually write about them.
For me, and I think maybe anyone who is a compulsive reader or a bookworm might relate to this. The boundary between my lived experience, whatever interactions I might be having with my children or my husband or strangers in the world, the boundary between that and my reading life is really porous. It's not like this is me reading and then this is me living. It's like whatever I'm reading ends up coloring what I'm experiencing as I move through my days, and vice versa. What's going on in my life then colors what I'm reading. So for me, it was really natural to weave in literature in this way. I didn't separate it so much from the scenes that I was writing. You know, a lot of times when you're reading a book that draws on literature, it's almost like the literature or the research comes in from on high, disembodied, almost like quoting a section of a book or quoting an author. You don't get a sense how the writer knows this piece of literature, or how old were they when they read it, or have they read it once or have they read it many times? Did they read it just for this piece they're writing, or is this a favorite author of theirs? I can remember where I was when I read a lot of different books. Like, we don't read as a disembodied brain. We read as physical humans in a physical place at an age. And all these things matter. What age are we when we first encounter Kate Chopin's The Awakening, right? What age are we when we encounter Shakespeare? How does it shape us and influence us? And then the structure really became thinking about, I'm going to date myself here, but, you know, I used to make mixtapes when I was a kid. And you don't want to put like 5 slow songs in a row and then like 5 fast techno songs. So I really tried to think about the reader experience in terms of moving from scene to engagements with literature. They sort of, I think of them as forays almost, like a little ramble, a little walk into a book.
I love the mixtape. I
Yeah.
love that. That's so
Bring
cool.
back the mixtape.